That was from the trailer of Greta Gerwig's Little Women. I'm going to read the plot summary of this movie from IMDb. Jo March reflects back and forth on her life, telling the beloved story of the March sisters, four young women, each determined to live life on their own terms. Joining us today for our review of Little Women, she is a film critic at Seattle Screen Scene. Melissa Tomingo, welcome back to the Slash Filmcast. How are you doing tonight, Melissa?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
It is great to have you on to discuss this movie. And before we discuss this movie, we should just point out that the book on which this movie is based is about 150 years old. And
It's
so
pretty old. Yeah.
you as a listener should assume that we will be spoiling plot points about the book and as well as specific decisions made in the film right at the top. Now, we're going to try to talk about the movie in chronological order, but just so we don't need to talk around things, and because this book has been out there for so long, we're just going to say right at the top, you should assume there's going to be spoilers, so we don't need to have a separate spoiler section today. So just be aware, if you have not been exposed to the story of Little Women ever before, you may want to see the film first or read the book first, or both, before you listen to this review. All that being said, Melissa, can you tell us about your relationship to this story and kind of the feelings you had going into this film and then coming out of it?
Yeah, so I do have a history with this story. I read the book pretty young. I was probably junior high, high school, and then it was one of those books that I returned to and reread over the years. Again, probably later in high school, and then reread it again in college. And then I did watch at least two of the adaptations. Certainly the 1994 Gillian Armstrong adaptation of it, which I have always had a lot of affection for. And I did at some point see the Katharine Hepburn, George Cukor version of the film as well. And I remember thinking that Katharine Hepburn was perfect for Jo. So this is a story and a kind of some film adaptations that I do have quite a bit of affection to, and it does feel like in some way it connects quite strongly to my childhood and my relationship with books and stories, and thinking about characters that I loved. Jo, of course, was a character that I absolutely loved. So it's interesting going into this movie, having kind of that history, and feeling a little bit of trepidation in thinking about how is, Greta Gerwig going to adapt this story that's quite beloved to me, and I have quite a bit of nostalgia for. And I do think one of the traps of just adapting a beloved story, especially one that has been well adapted, like the 1994 version, I think is really well done, is simply how to make a film that satisfies fans of the original story as well as a previous adaptation, giving key characters and scenes and even lines that you might want or expect, but then also bringing something sort of fresh to it, or like a tangible reason for making a new film. And coming out of it, I do think that Greta Gerwig she's done that. I think she's given us a story that is quite fully the tale of Little Women in terms of how fans of the book and of the previous films know it, but also has given us something fresh too, I think, to make us love the original material maybe even more and kind of draw out what's interesting about it, or lovable about it, but also to make us maybe see new things in it. And I think particularly what she does with the chronology of the plot of the film, not moving in strictly chronological order. The book moves kind of the girls grow up basically, and you're just following them as they grow. But of course, she is flips around from the present to the past in throughout the entire film, even starting sort of at a much later point in the chronology in the beginning of this film. And I do think that new chronology is really what ties to, I think, what's most fresh and interesting about this adaptation, in part because the new chronology, I think, emphasizes themes and ideas within the story we wouldn't necessarily have seen otherwise, making really interesting imagistic parallels, particularly between the past and the present, and then parallels between characters that I think you wouldn't necessarily see in a straight chronological presentation. And I also think that she solved I don't know if she solved it, but she took on the problem, the story problem that I had, and I think many readers have had with the story. And I've talked to my daughters about this. They're both my 16 and 18-year-old. They like Little Women, but they've always had an issue with the fact that Laurie and Jo do not end up together, because you love Laurie and you love Jo and you want them to be together, and then the story kind of fails you in that regard. And so I think Gerwig, the way that she sets up the chronology of this, she basically shows you Jo and Frederick in the beginning of the movie, and then she next cuts to Amy and Laurie. So right away, you're almost anticipating these two couples being together,
Mm.
and so I think the chronology of that is really helpful in setting you up for what is going to come. And then I think even maybe more significantly too, apart from just the relationships, the changed chronology makes Jo's writing sort of the focus of the film. And I think that's always really important to the story. But I think the centrality of that brings out something fresh, and I think it ties then to something personal about Greta Gerwig as a director, which I really like because it feels like fully the Little Women story, but it's also maybe about women doing writing and directing, which feels quite relevant and present and even urgent, I think, in for a film today. So I did really, really like this movie, and we went as a whole family, and my girls loved it. They said it's the best adaptation, and they're still not totally reconciled to Jo and Laurie not being together, but but they still really like this movie a lot, and I do as well for
Excellent.
all of those reasons.
I just want to clarify a couple things real quick. So, the 1994 Little Women, directed by Gillian Armstrong, was told in chronological order, basically, right?
Yes.
Whereas
Yep.
the
Pretty
new Little
much.
Women by Greta
I
Gerwig, like
I
cuts,
think
yeah,
so. Yeah, I think so.
it cuts back.
That's my memory of it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No worries. Whereas the new one cuts back and forth between past and present and kind of allows for these
Yes.
very interesting juxtapositions. And I think it's really interesting too, pointing out that the movie begins with Jo kind of later on in her life about to submit a story to Mr. Dashwood, and like if you had
Right.
started, like if you had started the story earlier in her life, that the whole theme of this being about her writing and her book and her appreciating her
Mhm.
own stories might not have come out as much. So
It
like
starts with like a climax scene,
Exactly.
yeah.
basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
starts with a climax, and it's a brilliant kind of opening, like literally framing device where she's
Yes.
standing in this doorway, kind of about to go into this room full of men to like submit this story and
Yeah.
for their approval, and she's kind
Yeah.
of psyching herself up. And like very much, I felt like this is kind of like Greta Gerwig herself, kind of
Yeah.
so, submitting her rendition of this story to the world to see as well.
Hmm.
I felt like a parallel there with that character. But let me just ask one quick question before I go to Devindra, which is like, were there any weaknesses in previous renditions of this story that you were hoping would be corrected in this new one? Like I think a lot of people have talked about how Amy's story in
Yeah.
like the previous film was given like she has always been rendered kind of as a brat, and that
Yeah.
this is the movie that finally gives Amy her due. And I'm curious if you felt that way going in, and if you felt like this movie actually does that.
I think I've always kind of liked Amy, but the problem came for me when there's sort of this abrupt switch into Amy's adulthood, and then we're just supposed to think, oh wait, now she and Laurie have this sudden connection. And so it always felt very strange to me that suddenly we knew Amy as this kind of vivacious little girl who was very opinionated, but then she turns into this woman character that falls in love with Laurie, and it sort of comes out of nowhere. And in the 1994 version of the film, it's actually a different actress that's used for the older Amy, so it even feels kind of more alienating. Like I don't even know who this person is anymore. So I think um, this film it gives us more of Amy from the very beginning, kind of hinting towards actually really liking Laurie. I mean, several times you see her looking at him, and she introduces herself, "I'm Amy," and almost like a hint to us and to the audience that she is already from the very beginning she is interested in Laurie. And so when it comes at the end, it's not really, it doesn't feel like a sudden shift that she's suddenly interested in this person in a different way. You kind of always know that's who she was. And I think Gerwig does a really great job of setting that up and making her character arc feel more, I think, organic. And then I know that some people have had a problem with Florence Pugh as the sort of younger Amy, but I really like the cohesiveness of the
Mhm.
same actor, both a younger Amy and an older Amy. Um, Even though you get like really young Kirsten Dunst as the younger Amy in the 1984 version, which she's great, but then you could, of course, never have this young girl playing the older part. So I really like that Gerwig made a kind of a bold choice to have the same actor play Amy and then have that cohesion, I guess, in her character.
Yeah, it's really interesting to reflect on like how all these little decisions can make a big impact when you're making an adaptation like this. You know, you wouldn't
Yeah.
think about like you wouldn't necessarily think that like you know, cutting back and forth would have such big thematic resonance, but or maybe you would, but I mean I wouldn't, and it certainly does in this movie. I want to hear what the rest of you have to say about Little Women, but before we do that, we gotta thank our sponsor for today, Quip. Jeff, tell us about Quip.
Oh, I'm so excited to tell you about Quip. Honestly, it's a weird thing to say that a toothbrush has changed your life, but I'm not exaggerating to say a toothbrush changed my life. I I love. We are now a 3 Quip household, and that is no joke, no exaggeration. I love Quip. I got one for my wife, got one for my son, and the reason I love Quip is because it actually makes my life better. It actually makes my life easier. I have fewer things to think about. It's amazing. You're talking about little things adding up to big things. That's how I feel about not having to think about brushing my teeth. I have to admit, I'm one of the 90% of people that doesn't brush or didn't before Quip brush for the dentist recommended 2 minutes. Now I do every single time. Why? Because the wonderful Quip vibrating toothbrush pulses every 30 seconds and then turns itself off after 2 minutes. So I don't have to think about it. I just start brushing, and after 30 seconds, it pulses, and I go to a different quadrant of my mouth because I'm that weird. But you don't have to do it that way. But then after 2 minutes, it turns itself off, and I know I'm done. And I just keep going until it turns itself off. It's so great. Plus, I'm also one of those terrible people that would use a toothbrush for years at a time. And it would be to the point where it was doing no good for me because the bristles were a complete mess. But with Quip, I have a delivery every 3 months, as is dentist recommended. I get a new bristles, new head of the toothbrush, new packet of toothpaste. It's cool. The packaging is awesome. It comes with these slick little instructions that tell you just pop off the old one, pop on the new one. It's got a battery replacement in the bag. It's amazing. It's got an awesome stand thing that keeps it up off the counter. I can just press it against my mirror. I love the Quip. We have 3 in my house, and I'm telling you, it has improved my life. So if you want to improve your life, have a better brushing experience, better oral hygiene, and do what dentists recommend, but the easy way, you can go to getquip.com/filmcast right now. You'll get your first refill free. That's your first refill free at getquip.com/filmcast. That's spelled GETQUIP.com/filmcast. FILMCAST, all one word. Quip, the Good Habits Company.
Let's move on. Devindra Hardawar, what are your thoughts on Little Women?
Yeah, I talked about it a bit in our top 10 episode for 2019. And I was surprised by how much I loved this movie because I had absolutely no experience with the book or the previous films. I don't know what I was doing in high school. They never assigned this to me. I went to a weird magnet school too, so they were really into Edith Wharton and not so much Little Women. So I really know Ethan Frome, and that book means a lot to me, but not so much Little Women. So I have absorbed a lot about this story, and people have talked with me about it, like related other characters to like, oh, this person is very much like like Amy in Little Women or something. So like I feel like I've absorbed so much of the story just by sheer osmosis. So it is funny like watching this. I could almost map out the entire thing just based on the knowledge I already have. But I was astounded by the framing of this movie. Like Greta Gerwig just makes this movie so modern and alive. It doesn't feel like an adaptation of a 150-year-old book. It feels like, a very modern screenplay. And it's not, I don't think it's like super anachronistic. It's not like the way Dickinson, the TV show, is trying to like really have a modern flair and everything. It's more like it is looking at this older story through a modern lens. So I feel like the conversations they're having, and Amy is a character in particular. Like a lot of folks have talked to me about like how much they dislike how Amy is portrayed in the book and in the other, in the actual other films. And I love the depth to her character. I love that. First of all, I love that it's Florence Pugh playing her. Because she is shaping up to be like one of the best actors of her generation. Like she is tremendous both as the young Amy, where I think the only downside there is that her voice is a little husky and a little deep, but that's just her voice. Somebody I saw on Twitter, like somebody released a video of her singing something at 13, and it sounds just like Florence Pugh does today. So that is just her, unfortunately. But I love her voice. I love her performance, and she brings so much depth to that character. Like honestly, I came out of this movie really into her character and really understanding her, position in life and how she's trying to manage it. And what I find fascinating is that this movie does this for pretty much every single character. You kind of know what Jo is dealing with and like how she perceives life and the struggles she's dealing with, but you kind of get this for every sister too. So like Meg and her being in a pretty being in a pretty traditional marriage and dealing with family life, dealing with kids and not having as much money, as maybe the rest of her family does, or just kind of living a life that's very, very poor, but making do with it. And then, also even a bit of Beth and what she wants out of life. And I wish the movie could have done more with her because she is basically the character that exists to die in this story.
Yeah.
But like that's it. We know that. But her relationship with the neighbor, her piano playing, like there's something tragic about her character, but also her confronting death, like their conversations on the beach, even their mother, even Marmee, which is a great name, I feel like gets a bit of depth to her, like the idea that she is not just some saint. She's not just some perfect, mother figure. Like she is somebody who's also, I don't know, angry all the time. She gave us a bit of Incredible Hulk there. So I love that there's so much depth to this story. And yeah, you can really relate to all these characters. I will say the way the story is framed, I can understand why in the book people are very disappointed that, Jo and Laurie didn't get together. But I feel like this movie at least gives us a very good argument for why she may want somebody who challenges her a bit more than the, beautiful neighbor boy who has been in love with her forever. I think like there's something there, and you can understand.
Well, when you put it like that, Devendra,
yeah,
it doesn't sound super appealing. Jeff Kanata, gotta ask you, what was your experience with Little Women going into this film?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my experience with Little Women is best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Fascinating.
I have neither read the novel nor seen the movie from 1994. So I can say for me, definitively, this is the version of the story I adore.
Nice. Very,
okay.
very, very cute, Jeff.
Thank you. I am right there with Devendra. I don't know how I managed to get through both high school and college without reading this book. It's even more shameful for me because for multiple years of my life, quite a lot of years of my life, I was in a long-term relationship with a girl who was named Amy Jo after characters in this book.
Wow.
Okay.
She was named after this book. So you'd think there would have been a time that I would have sat down and read the book, but somehow I didn't. And I wish I had, because I think this story is delightful, and I love this movie. I adore this movie. It is it's exquisite, and I suspect that I wouldn't have loved the 94 version like I love this. I don't know. I haven't seen that movie, but so much of what I love about this movie are the things that you guys have highlighted as being new to the tale, new to this take,
Mm.
i.e., the chronology. I I think I am enraptured with movies that are about time, right? Time is the great villain of humanity, right? It is the great villain of art. The wonderful quote that I always mention from John Barton, the old hard-hearted arbitrator, time. I I am fascinated with movies that put time under a microscope, and this movie does that. It is about time and what time does to us, to our families, to our relationships with one another, to our goals and our ability uh, to dream, and the way our lives are a result of our dreams and are a reflection of our dreams, but also show how dreams evolve and change and are abandoned. And the way this movie dips into different time periods instead of just showing it from a chronological start and finish really makes that hit home. You know, when you see Beth die and then the next scene you see Joe staring out the window to a living Beth, that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh, we are back in time. She has no idea what's coming, right? That's how we live our lives, is not knowing what is coming around the corner. And but we as the audience know, and so we feel that sense of how life is mercurial and unexpected. And I found all that so beautifully expressed and so wonderful, and oftentimes not really knowing exactly where I was in the story because I wasn't familiar with the story, not knowing exactly where I was in the chronology until the scene had progressed a bit, and then going, oh, context clues like the length of hair on characters, the way this movie uses seasons and place, the way it creates place. I'm so in love with that in movies too. And when a movie creates a sense of place where I want to go there, this movie has there's these wonderful tracking shots of the girls just walking down the street, and you see these buildings that change over time. There's one in particular that starts all like with a sign that has been taken down. You just see the outlines of where a sign used to be, and then later it's got a placeholder sign over it where it's a new building, a new business. And sometimes they're walking down that street in snow, and other times they're walking down that street with beautiful autumnal leaves everywhere. It creates this sense of place and time passing that I found completely mesmerizing and transportive. Right, I felt like I was wrapped up in this the ribbon of this life as it wove back and forth through time. And I thought that was great. The performances are all wonderful, but the structure of the movie to me was really the greatest part. And so I wonder if I had been more familiar with this story, how I would have felt if I had different expectations and if it would have defied those. But not having any expectations, I honestly didn't even really know the broad beats of this story. I was completely in the dark going in. So I'm delighted that I now know the story of Little Women. Much past the point at which I should have, but also that this movie was so entertaining and beautiful. I mean, it's a gorgeous movie on many levels. I really loved it.
So I'm in the same place as Jeff when it comes to the level of knowledge I had before I saw this movie, and I think the moment when I knew.
So the three dudes, I guess, the three dudes.
Huh,
proving
I wonder if
everything.
that means something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the moment when I knew this movie had its hooks in me was. Let's just start by saying agreed with everything Devindra said about Florence Pugh. I mean, she's already worked with some of the great directors of our time, and she's gonna be in a blockbuster film this year, Black Widow, right? And so like that's gonna further catapult her into the limelight. I think she's enormously talented, and the character of Amy, I feel, is an amazing one. I mean, she gives that whole speech about the economic value of marriage that feels like it's it's a sentiment from over a century ago, but it feels like it's a completely sensible and logical thing for someone to say today. Obviously, in a different context today, but still, like this is clearly a character who is intent on her own self-determination and self-actualization, and I think Florence Pugh plays her wonderfully.
Mhm.
But I was filled with rage at the moment when she burns Joe's book. Like, there's no coming back from that. Like when she burns Joe, I'm just like, there's no way. Like, fuck this person. Like, there's no way. I can never forgive what she does with Joe. I'm just like, I can't imagine the level of evil it would take for someone to, and this is a sentiment that I've seen online too. There's like some people feel like once Amy burns that book, like there's no coming back for that character. But I'm curious what y'all feel.
She doesn't realize, to her, I mean, she literally says, I
Yeah.
couldn't burn your dresses, so this is the only thing you care about. She has no
Yeah.
concept of what it took to make that book.
To me, that
You know?
makes it worse. What you just said,
Well,
like
she's
but
also
it's
like
like-
12 or 13 at the time, too, right?
Right.
Like
It's
she's
a
very-
transgression of
Yeah.
ignorance. It is not
Yeah.
a transgression of malice.
I
Yeah.
guess.
And I mean, that's maybe one drawback of having an older
Right.
actor in that part is just that when you see the little Kirsten Dunst, you're like, she's really just a kid. She doesn't get it. But here, you almost feel like she should know better,
Right,
and maybe it's
because
harder to reconcile.
Florence Pugh is in her 20s and she's playing, I think, a 12-year-old in that scene, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
it's tough to kind of separate the notion that, like, oh, this is actually just a child who doesn't know any better. But even still, I mean, as a kid, I don't think I could ever do that to someone, nor forgive someone who did that to another person. But anyway, but yeah, I had such a strong reaction to that, and I realized at that moment that, like, wow, I deeply care about every single one of these characters and their eventual fate. So I echo everything y'all said about this movie. I really enjoyed it. I loved the way it bounced around in terms of the chronology. But for me, the MVP of this movie, right, is Saoirse Ronan as the character of Jo. She's just kind of trying to make her way in this world that's telling her, like, she's doing the wrong thing, and she's like, you know what, I'm gonna do it anyway. And I think there's a reason that many people who read this book find her to be the most relatable and to be the character to root for the most. And of course, we will get to the ending and what that means. But I really just loved that character and thought it was beautifully played. I mean, I think the two critical scenes with Jo March that I can think of are, number one, when she rejects Laurie, and which, by the way, also excruciating to watch because you really want these two characters to be together,
Yeah.
and then she kind of gives this monologue, I think, towards the end of the movie about I'm not even going to try to replicate it, but it's about basically like how women should have the ability to create their own destiny, but at the same time she's incredibly lonely, and that there's this kind of tension of in the society that she lives in, at least, this tension between being a married woman and falling in love and having a career, and like being a writer, being successful, and like those things seem like, if I'm reading it correctly, those things seem to be in tension in her situation. And she kind of heartbreakingly brings that to light in that monologue. And so I just thought that was just a magnificent performance, and I think it's well worth the Academy Award nomination she got. But yeah, Melissa, what did you think of this character, this version of Jo March?
Yeah, I mean, I really loved that aspect of the character too. That I thought that Greta Gerwig just really deepened the kind of dilemma there for Jo, wanting to kind of have it all, to write and write what she wants to write, but kind of finding herself within the structure, both of her kind of family situation in terms of their relative wealth or lack of wealth.
Right.
But then also, of course, bringing her art to these sort of male gatekeepers, as it were, and the certain structures that she has to kind of fall into, and then sort of realizing that she perhaps she cannot have the freedom to write what she wants to write unless she makes compromises in other ways, perhaps personally, just giving in and marrying, or within her art. Okay, I'm just going to have to write what this male gatekeeper says is what will sell and what he will take from me. So and I thought that really was teased out really beautifully, and it's a really nice parallel, I think, with Amy when she talks about marriage as an economic proposition, because sort of what Amy is talking about there really parallels, I think, Joe's her dilemma as well. And so it sort of enriches, I think, both of what they're saying and both of their characters. And that's another kind of chronological kind of thing, the editing and the way that Gerwig matches those kinds of things that I think, again, deepen Joe's central kind of dilemma as well as Amy's, and making us care sort of about both of them, because Amy is also kind of thinking about art too, and she doesn't, she wants to be also great, and if she can't be great, then she's not going to try. And I think Joe has the same thing, that she's trying for greatness, but she's sort of trying to navigate, again, pretty clearly, like what does greatness even mean? Is greatness what I decide it is? Is it greatness what Frederick decides it is? Is it what this publisher decides it is? And so I thought that was just really beautifully woven kind of throughout the film.
Let's talk about that ending. Speaking of what the publisher thinks about what greatness is,
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of discussion online. This is like, if you had told me a few months ago that I'd be spending like hours reading fan theories about like how the Little Women ending, I would not have believed you. But it's just like, wow, this is like a very much like an Inception style ending where it's not clear exactly what has occurred. And
it was amazing though when she says, "What's your name?" and she goes, "Joe," and she goes, "Joe what?" And she says, "Joe Skywalker."
There's been but there's been many articles, I've read many of them, about what actually is happening in the final sequences of this movie. And you see Joe basically go to Mr. Dashwood and present her book. And that's happening at the same time as you're seeing her meeting with Friedrich. Like, it's cutting kind of back and forth between these two things. And they're arguing about whether she should marry the guy in the story that she's writing, which presumably is based on her actual life. And, Mr. Dashwood obviously wants her to marry, and she's like, no, I don't want to do it. And then so she kind of makes a compromise with him. Is like, give me this percentage, give me this amount of money, and you'll get the ending that you want. And she kind of relents and makes the ending that Mr. Dashwood wants. And then we see that ending then play out in the reality of the film. So the question for you all is, do you think the ending we see in the movie, right, which is Joe March getting together with Friedrich, right? Like, and they go to that school, and everyone's super happy, and it's super idyllic and charming. Is that, in your opinion, what actually happened, or is it just the rewritten ending in her book? Melissa, opinion on this?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, I think it's bold that she is purposely leaving us in this tension. And I know, kind of like the ending of Inception, you want to know, like, is it going to fall or not? But I think the whole point is we're sort of left in the tension of that story, and it's of those two kind of paths. And the film is kind of about that. I mean, it's about us as readers, or as people who are expecting certain things for a story, and then navigating that a writer has to do to present the story to us. Because I think there is something interesting. So if she had gone with the ending that Joe wanted, as it were, and the film then had ended with Joe alone, which actually, in the way that Louisa May Alcott herself ended, she never married anyone. And I think in some way...
You mean her actual life, not the book?
Her actual life, yes, her actual life. I think that probably audiences would be disappointed with that. I mean, I think on some level, audiences want Joe to be married off. So there's a real kind of, I think, tension there that we're supposed to think about, that perhaps the reality is no, she never would have gotten married, but we actually do kind of want the ending too. So we want to have what the writer's reality would have been, but we also want to have the happy ending. we kind of
Right.
we kind of want both things. Um, in a way,
it's very much a have your cake and eat it too scenario.
But I think
right?
I think
Yeah.
what Melissa's saying is that's the point, right? At
Yes.
least that's how I took it. I think it's much more explicit than that. I don't think it's even just that it's tension. Like I think that you're absolutely right, Melissa. From my perspective, the tension is intentional, but
It's the
also
thing. Yeah.
but I think that is pointing to you, the audience, and going, this is
Yes.
what you want. This is what
Yeah.
you need.
Are you not
This is what you
entertained?
Are you
Yeah,
not
yeah,
entertained? Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
like you are this guy. You are this dude in this office who demands these things of us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you want your happy ending so badly. Well, here it is, but that's
Yeah.
not really how life works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the
It
thing
is-
in my head canon, she doesn't get together with him, and I think that's like
Yeah.
and just to be clear, I think like if you look at the screenplay that Greta Gerwig wrote, like when she's flashing back, I think she writes in parentheses fiction question mark, so like even she leaves it open in the
Right.
screen at the screenplay level
Right.
what you're actually
Yeah.
seeing.
The movie, by the way, leaves a big there's a big clue like as soon as she meets with Mr. Dashwood, right? Like there is the scene of Bear turning up at her house and having that
Yeah.
nice dinner with her family, and then like the rom-com rush to the airport
Yeah.
moment.
But
You know,
Literally
that's
running.
not you
Yeah.
guys. What is the movie trying to tell you here? Like this is not.
That's the thing.
happening.
That's the thing is like that's all that stuff of like I think he
Yeah.
loves you. Really? You know, it's all just so
Yeah.
over the top compared to everything else in the
Saccharine.
movie.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It
It's
just
Totally
doesn't.
saccharine and
Yeah.
but I think that's the point, is that this is the squeeze that commercialism puts on this. And I think Greta Gerwig is saying the same thing. I think she's saying, hey, when I read Little Women, it didn't, this is how I felt. Like this is how I thought
wanted.
it should end. Yeah. But clearly, this is what has to happen sometimes. And so I'm even going to do it for you in this film version, but I'm also going to wink and tell you that's not really what happened.
Right, because
Right.
she's intercutting between this romantic comedy style ending and the book getting like a lot of like bookmaking porn going on in this
Right.
movie, right? And like
Right.
really, like it's almost indicating like that is the real love story of this movie, right? Is her
Yes.
coming
Yes.
into her own
Yes.
as a writer and getting this book made, getting her book work sold, and
And ownership.
yeah, and
ownership,
having
I
ownership of it,
think-
and
I
she's
think
like clutching it to her. It's like really meaningful.
It's
and yeah,
the triumph of the end is her retaining the rights to her work.
yeah,
I think that, and I think that's supposed to feel like this rousing, stirring, anthemic moment of like, hey, A, fuck you, pay me, and B, it's mine. I made it. I
Yeah.
keep it. We're not making sequels
And
based
also,
on
I
my
get
stuff.
the copyright, like
Yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
not just money, but also like the power of owning
Mhm.
the property. It's something
Mhm.
special.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the lighting in that scene, the very final shot where she's looking at the book,
Yeah,
because
it is
when
the drab modern lighting.
is
like,
it okay?
Yeah,
Okay, because
realistic. Yeah,
right, because the scene where they're all in the school and everything's wonderful,
Mhm.
that is very much the warm lighting that we get of the past.
yeah. That's
the
a Joe
past
Wright movie,
scenes.
and then this is like, yeah, very
Yeah.
much realistic lighting. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So make of that what you will, listeners. Make of that what you will. But I do think it is brilliant that I when I was saying have your cake and eat it too, I wasn't necessarily saying that's a bad thing.
No,
I
I
think
think- yeah.
it's brilliantly done.
Yeah.
And it's just like it kind of leaves you thinking about like what are the narratives I expect, and
Mhm.
as you said, Jeff, right? It forces you as the audience to consider your own role in demanding the kinds of stories where, like the happy ending is for the girl to get the guy, and like why do we demand that, and is that necessarily the best thing for the girl in all cases?
Mhm.
And I love how the movie does that. So.
Yeah. I think it's a really smart reinterpretation of kind of this story. Like I would certainly have
Yeah.
more of an understanding if I read the book, but I'm still like flabbergasted that we can have this conversation about what does it really mean for an interpretation of something so old. I've been like kind of similar. I've been watching the Netflix series Dracula, which is a weird retelling of the Bram Stoker novel, and it takes a lot of liberties and like changes things around and does so in a way that just feels like it's Stephen Moffat doing his Sherlock thing, right? And it feels like it's very flashy and really showing you like, oh, but what about this twist? You never thought of it this way, huh? Whereas this movie is just like, it slowly incepts the idea that, oh, I've been fooling you this whole time. How do you like that, suckers?
Can I
You're just on
ask
a
yeah, go
you're
ahead,
just
Jeff.
watching new versions of every movie that a young Kirsten Dunst was in. Is that
Yeah,
the idea?
basically.
Mhm.
Can I ask you a question? I want to ask Melissa and Jeff a question here about like do you feel like are you rooting for the Joe Laurie storyline? I know Melissa, you kind of already touched on this, but like, do you want them to get together, or do you want Joe to get together with Friedrich Baer? Because it seems to me as though she has a lot more in common with Friedrich Baer, who actually respects her as an artist and pushes her to do better. But of course, Saoirse Ronan and Timothée Chalamet are very cute together, so I guess that's,
There
I
is a
mean,
cute.
yeah.
There's an undeniable
mean,
cute.
Yeah, I mean, I think this movie does a really good job of making their relationship really seem like a brother and sister relationship. I mean,
Yeah.
that Joe in particular, I mean, she really treats him like a brother. I mean, Laurie clearly didn't see her that way, but I think so that when it comes to that proposal, it doesn't feel as heartbreaking because you never really do feel that Joe looks at them that way. I mean, this movie I think makes you really believe that, and so it just doesn't feel right. And then with Mr. Bear, I mean, I don't necessarily even want. I mean, I think intellectually they're definitely a better match, but I also think that the film maybe purposely doesn't give us much more of their relationship, in part because I think Gerwig still wants the pinnacle of the movie to be Joe publishing her book, not getting together with this other character.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think in some ways you could say, I mean, if it's a movie about Joe meeting someone, then there's a flaw in not giving us more of Frederick. But if it's not really about that, it's more about her book, then I think it's perfectly constructed to give us sort of the idea that there might be someone out there for her, but that's kind of not really the point. It's more about her and her book and her publishing of it. So yeah, this movie did a lot to reconcile me to not her not being with anybody really.
Well, so it's so interesting that is your central framing of this entire experience, because your
That's how I
first
grew up with it.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I came in completely ignorant of all that baggage.
Yeah.
And not something I'm proud of at all, but I'm completely ignorant of it to the point where I was not viewing this movie as a love story. And I mean, perhaps indelicate of me to say, but I didn't ever think that Joe was into boys
Yeah.
through this. You know what I mean? I just thought,
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't root for her to be with anybody. I was like,
She
she's
seems
clearly
beyond boys. Like
Right.
she seems
She
beyond
does.
all of this. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, Louisa May Alcott actually, she did say something about feeling like she was a boy trapped in a girl's body, and she never really was interested in men in that way. And people have kind of read that in different ways, but it does really feel that way, that she doesn't really view men as like in a romantic way at all.
There's a
Right.
lot of clothes changing going on in this movie too, like between Joe
Yeah.
and Laurie. Like they're swapping clothes. Like they're
Yep.
they're doing a lot of stuff. It's almost like, to me, Laurie seems framed as the way like I think a female character would be in a typical
Yeah.
story like this too. Like it is
Right.
an interesting flip in many ways.
Yeah, that's true. Mhm.
Here's another random question, guys. Is it like messed up that Laurie went after Joe with such intensity and then later ended up marrying her sister? That just like, and my understanding is that the like 94 movie makes his decision feel much more impulsive than it did in this movie, in which
Well-
it feels like much better considered.
This is a time at which your options are those people. That's your it's not like we can swipe left, you know what I'm saying? It's like-
I mean, I think this movie does a really great job of convincing us that Amy loves Laurie. But
Yes,
yeah, I'm not
yes.
totally sure I buy that Laurie has completely switched for Amy,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
I guess.
that's the thing is that like I feel like Joe's whole arc feels like the best developed to me overall. Like she's the main
Really
character,
complete.
right?
Yeah.
Really complete. I agree with you that what is it, Beth, the one that dies, right? Like she basically
Mhm.
exists only to die. Amy's like slightly less fleshed out than Joe, and then I felt like Emma Watson's character, right, was
Mhm.
felt
Yeah.
like it was given a little short shrift. Like it felt like a
Mhm.
pretty incomplete arc to me, and so I appreciate that she tried to like give them all something, but like it was
Yeah.
varying degrees of success in my opinion. And as
Yeah.
a result of that, I agree with you, Melissa, that like I felt like maybe I needed a little bit more about that relationship before I fully bought that like that Laurie had made the switch from loving Joe to loving Amy.
Yeah.
Well, there's a shorthand. I mean, it's not a lot of screen time, but something that really worked for me because I've sort of experienced that in my own youth is that little moment he has with Joe where he says, "Hey, I loved you. I still love you, but I love her, and it's different." Like that thing
Yeah.
that you can
Mhm.
have in
That
your
felt
youth when
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
well, the thing you
Yeah.
can have in your youth when you feel like you're infatuated with someone and then it doesn't work out and then you meet someone else and you're like, "Oh, I didn't know I could have love that felt like this. I thought all love was that first category that was sort
Mhm.
of weird and not right." And I don't know, it's really only one sentence, but it unlocked something for me that made me buy that transition better.
All
Yeah,
right.
I think I mean the telling of that does make sense. Maybe just a little bit more of showing of that.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I do want to say I do think that you're right, David, that there it would have been nice to have a little bit more of Beth and Meg. Although I would say that that's also in the novel as well. Um, but I did really like what
When you
Gerwig.
say
I
that's
think that
also in the novel, are you saying the
well,
novel
just
has actual more stuff, or that's the way the novel
well,
treats them?
there is a little bit more about both of those characters, but I think you do always feel like they are more side supporting characters that
Right.
you don't get as much of them in the novel as well. But I think Gerwig did something really interesting with she sort of paired Beth and her death with Meg and her wedding, and I think that thematically really ties this whole idea of loss and things changing, particularly relative to Joe, who was so like for her, her community and her relationships, their family are so important. And when Beth dies, there's this loss, and then the Meg's wedding is also a loss that's breaking up
Yeah.
their family essentially. And there's that you mentioned that. Earlier, Jeff, about the when the cut from Beth's death to Beth out the window, and it's Meg's wedding,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
like these two losses for Joe, I think, are paired there. And
Yeah.
that I
It's
think
beautiful.
especially,
Yeah.
yeah, it is really beautiful. And I think it especially came home to me this time too, because in part because my 18-year-old daughter really responded to that part of the film where she feels like at 18, she's kind of losing her childhood in a way, and yet she doesn't feel like an adult yet. And so that that aspect of the film, that sense of loss and losing your childhood, not because of death in particular, but you just feel like people are growing up, they're going away, and you're losing this closeness that you had with this community, and there isn't. You're
Mhm.
worried that there's never going to be something to replace it. And I think this film really teases that out really beautifully with those two characters in particular, Beth and Meg, as they relate to Joe.
There's almost a bit of the end of like Lady Bird in here too, of like the loss of like where you grew up and what it means and
Yes.
what moving on means and what there's so much to that. Like there is a drop of nostalgia throughout this entire movie in a way. Maybe that
Sure.
happens
Yeah.
because you're starting in the modern, framework. Like, yeah, we haven't mentioned Meryl Streep, by the way, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
her character is fantastic and does a good job of really solidifying like what the themes of the film are and like at least like what she's trying to tell Joe and how she kind of aligns herself more with Amy. Like it all kind of makes sense, and I think on Amy's part too, like really fleshes her out as a character, like by basically saying like, oh, you were the last hope of this family in a way, right? Like who knows if
Hmm.
Joe is gonna have a decent career, but somebody needs to marry well so that your family gets some sort of support. And I do feel like throughout the scenes in Paris, like that is kind of a weight on Amy in a way. Like like that whole early relationship she had, and like her push to like get engaged with that person. That didn't seem as much for her as it did for the family. Like, this is what I have to do in a way.
The only casting that I found jarring was Bob Odenkirk.
Bob Odenkirk, Saul Goodman.
Well,
is
when
the
he
father.
appears, it's hard to like. Yeah.
I mean, I love the guy. I love him,
Yes.
and I get it. He's now clearly a dramatic actor, but he's ridiculous. I just see him as Mr. Show and a comedian,
Well,
and
I agree, Jeff, because basically the entire movie, until he appears, is building up to him appearing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's like,
Right.
we have another letter from Father, and it's like, you never see Father, you never see the flashback, and so you're like, I wonder who Father could. Are we ever even going to meet Father during the course of the movie? And then he shows up, and it's Saul Goodman, and I'm like, what? That was the dramatic build-up to that guy. I mean, again,
No. I was like, really, Laura Dern? Really? Okay.
That's who you chose.
I mean, I love Bob Odenkirk, dude.
Yes.
He's a
Yeah.
genius.
He's so good.
But
Yeah.
for me, he's a comedic genius,
Well-
and I just every scene he's in, I'm just like, where's the gag? I don't know.
Better Call Saul, one of the best shows on TV. Okay, like, let's just be clear, and he's
Yeah.
great in it. But just
My
not
favorite
the,
sketch comedy show of all time
Yeah,
is Mr.
it-
Show. I love him. He's a genius.
just not
probably-
the role I expected him to be in. Anyway.
It doesn't help that his costuming and like his word, like even his like facial hair looks like it's a Mr. Show sketch. Like, it looks like he is in a period thing. Yeah.
Feels
So
very
true.
anachronistic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true. He's like in a different movie. Although I have to say, I loved what's his name? The actor who plays the neighbor.
Chris Cooper.
Yeah, Chris Cooper is just like
Cooper.
under a mountain
Oh.
of hair. It's just awesome. I was like, wow, he
He's
looks really
great.
good.
Yeah, he was great, and I loved his. It was very beautiful and heartbreaking, his whole arc with the piano and everything like that.
Oh yeah.
Although that
Yeah.
was another random. Like, here's the thing: at some point in this movie, I just kind of like let go of my. Like my adherence, I suspended my disbelief fully, because there's this scene where they go out and they help the like even poorer family, and they come back and there's this whole feast there, and I'm like, okay, I guess he must have had like a bunch of delivery people like send that over, and then when he delivers the piano, I'm like, okay, we're not dealing with any kind of reality that.
But also, like, he delivered them a feast because they helped the poor people. He should have just sent the feast to the poorer people, right?
I mean,
maybe?
hopefully he did both.
Yeah, he's like,
But then, like, piano, like, modern technology can barely move pianos that efficiently. So, like, how'd they do it back? Anyway, okay, but that's not what the movie's about. That's not what the movie's
No,
about.
well, I will say one thing the movie is kind of about, by the way, is like the power of goodness in a
Yeah.
very
Yes.
powerful way. Like, there is
Yeah.
no church, there's no like real religion here. It's just kind of, it's just people
Yeah.
being good. That is Marnie's whole thing, basically.
There is a really interesting shot when the March women are going to bring food to the Hummel family, and in the background are people going into a church. And it's a really kind of a
Mm.
striking contrast that these women are, doing charity essentially. Meanwhile, people are sort of piously going to church, and that's very much kind of tied to the Transcendentalists and Louisa May Alcott and her sort of family. They kind of swore off church and they were doing other things, but it was a kind of a nice just visual moment, I think, that sort of
Yes.
underscores what you're saying, Devendra.
You can do good without being religious, which is something
Amazing.
that,
yes.
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 Yeah, it's something we should all remember. But I think we can wrap it up there, unless there's anyone else who has anything you want to make sure we talk about. But I think we've journeyed through most of the film. I think it's a great film, and everyone should go watch it. So if you've come this far in the review, and you haven't seen the movie yet, go check it out.
I want to say one last quick
Yes.
thing, which probably goes without saying, but
Bring it
we
home,
haven't
Jeff.
really mentioned it, and we didn't mention it last week because I hadn't seen this movie. It is a travesty that Greta Gerwig is not nominated for Best Director.
Listen, it directed itself, okay?
It is
happened.
unbelievable to me. I mean, honestly, the
maddening.
direction of this movie is exquisite, and I just can't square that circle. It's pretty frustrating.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, thanks for reminding us of that. For those who don't remember, the 5 nominees were Quentin Tarantino, Bong Joon-ho, Sam Mendes, Todd Phillips, and Martin Scorsese. I know who I would replace with Greta Gerwig in that mix, but I think everyone will have a different answer for that.
Me too.
In any
I think
case,
it's the same.
in any case, this has been our review of Little Women. You can find more episodes of the Slash Filmcast at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. Our theme song comes from adamwarrock.com. And this episode was edited by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Melissa Tominga, where can people find more of your work on the internet?
I am at seattlescreenscene.com and also at One April Day, ONEAPRILDAY on Twitter.
Jeff Kanata?
You can find me on Twitter at Jeff Kanata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T. I also do a video game podcast that's called DLC. You can find that wherever you get podcasts or by just heading over to 5by5.tv/DLC. I also do a live play Dungeons and Dragons show where I'm making up the story. If you want to you hear me talking about stories all the time. I'm the guy authoring a big story with a bunch of really talented improvisers playing the characters. I urge you to give it a shot. It's called The Dungeon Run. You can find it wherever you get podcasts as an audio podcast by searching for The Dungeon Run, or you can find it on YouTube by searching for The Dungeon Run there, or you can watch it live when we record it on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific time at caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run.
How about you, Devindra?
Or you can find me on Twitter at Devindra. I write about tech at Engadget.com, and I'm also co-hosting the Engadget podcast there, so go check that out.
I host a show called Culturally Relevant, where I interview cool people every other week. Check it out at culturallyrelevantshow.com. Next week, we will be discussing The Gentleman. So we've reviewed Little Women this week. Next week, it's The Gentleman, the new Guy Ritchie movie. Should be a fun discussion. So tune in.
It kind of balances the gender scales there because, that movie apparently does not have many women in it. Oh, well.
I wouldn't say it's balanced, if you take into account the last century of movies. But if you take into account
just for the podcast,
these 2 weeks of the podcast, certainly I agree with you. So
you know what, though? To be fair, I never read that book in high school either.
It's true. It's true. So
It's a
I
classic.
Guess, it's all even. Okay. Well, that's going to be our plan for next week. Tune in for that. This has been the Slash Filmcast. We'll see you later. All right. We are still broadcasting live, but we are going to record this next section starting in a minute. So, Melissa, this has been great as usual. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was great fun. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Shall we keep going?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Devindra, did you see Bad Boys for Life?
I did not.
Okay.
That's all you.
Okay.
I may see it at some point this week, like if I can sneak out.
All right. How long do you think you're going to go on each of your sections? I'm just so I have some sense.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't.
Did you have a
need
lot
more
to
than
say
5
about?
I don't need more than 5 minutes.
Okay.
basically.
Okay. Cool. There was this. There was this game that one of the donors suggested, and I was thinking we could play it if we were if we didn't have enough material. Does that make sense?
Okay.
But let's see. I think we'll have enough material. So let's do this.
Sure.
In 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and joining me are
Devindra Hardawar.
And Jeff Kanata.
welcome to the show, everyone. Today on this podcast, what we're going to be doing is discussing some what we've been watching, and then moving on into an in-depth review of Little Women with Melissa Tominga from Seattle Screen Scene. Really looking forward to that conversation. I think it'll be a good one. But yeah, that's what we have in store for you for the podcast. Find more episodes at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Now, I literally just got back home from LA about 2 hours ago. So I just flew in from LA. And if I'm a little bit tired and loopy, that's why. My flight got canceled, by the way. Completely canceled. And I had...
What were you flying?
I was flying Southwest. And let me just tell you...
Yeah.
it is a fairly terrifying experience to go to go through the security and get
Yep,
through the thing,
yep.
and then you get there and it just says big words canceled, and I'm like, don't we have the technology that they could like notify you of this, via an email or something like that? I guess I should have checked the status, but it feels like this is a problem we should have solved already. Anyway, I got in a couple hours ago from LA because I was there to film a live performance with Stephen Tobolowsky at the Whitefire Theater, and I put the call out for people to RSVP to that last week. Many of you did, and I just want to thank everyone who came to that event. It was so cool, and we got all the footage we needed. The audience, by the way, was extremely patient and understanding. We had to do crowd reactions separately, so we pointed the cameras at the crowd, and they all did the reactions like we wanted them to, and everyone was just so awesome, and I'm very grateful for everyone who showed up. So thanks all for coming, and I thought it went really well, and looking forward to launching those videos out into the world in the next few months. Finally, I also had a chance to hang out with Peter Serretta, editor-in-chief of SlashFilm.com, when I was down in LA. And we're walking down Hollywood Boulevard, just chatting, walking down Hollywood Boulevard and chatting. And we're passing these people who, it's this thing where you dress up in these costumes, people dress up in these costumes, and you pay them so you can take a photo with them.
Yeah.
And I have to say, overall, it's pretty depressing because
I don't feel like you're giving that a good enough description.
Okay, tell me. Yeah, I mean, I was going to get into it, but go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I know, but you said, it seems like it's an organized thing. And
Jeff, you seem really into this for some reason.
well, as somebody who lives and works in Los Angeles,
I mean, we have those too in New York, and they're the people in Times Square, and you don't want to have pictures with them, but they're there.
No, you don't want to have pictures with these people either, and I think Dave is going to explain that. But I want it to be very clear, if anybody has not been to Times Square or not been down to Hollywood and Highland, the Mann's Chinese Theater is really where, which I guess it's not called that anymore. Anyway, the old Mann's Chinese Theater is where this happens. It's become sort of LA's version of Times Square. And these are just amateur people who procure their own costuming. I think perhaps I was just worried, Dave, that when people heard you explain it, they thought, oh, yeah, it's like going to Disneyland and you get a picture with Mickey.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? That's the aspiration of what these people want to provide.
Yes.
But the truth of it is that you have people, often in very, very, very hot California weather, wearing layers and layers of ill-fitting, poorly constructed costumes.
Yeah.
Some of them actually very good, I should say, too. I don't want to cast aspersions, but there's let's say a broad spectrum of quality level, and there are numerous ones. There are very odd choices as to what people are there as and what they're doing and how they get you to. So you go into what you're saying. I just wanted it to be clear that this is not something that is official, and it's not. The experience can be across the board. So
yes, all very fair to say, and I think that what I saw leaned more heavily on the low end of the experience, right?
There's actually a great documentary. Have you ever seen the documentary? I can't remember what it's called, but about the guy who played Superman for years and years. I think he's still out there.
Oh yeah. But
well, I don't remember what that movie is called, but it's great about this dude who would go out and be Superman every single day.
Because when you go to Comic-Con or something, you see extremely sophisticated cosplay. You know what I mean? People who have put hours and hours of work into these costumes, and it's you can appreciate the craftsmanship, and many of those people I would pay money to take a photo with. Just because it's wow, you put so much work. You clearly have admired this for a long time. But many of the people I encountered kind of just look like they bought a costume at the dollar store. You know what I mean? They're ill-fitting. They don't even look anything like what they're supposed to. Anyway, so I'm walking down the street with Peter Serretta, and we see Spider-Man, and we see Captain America, and we see all these other things, and we're okay, we have no desire to take a photo with any of these people. But then we saw someone dressed as a Navi, which I know people might not know what that is. It's a
No, everyone knows what that is, Dave.
it's a-
Everyone knows what that is.
it's a creature from the 2009 movie Avatar by James Cameron. And Peter saw it.
Wait, so what you're saying, just to be clear, a person getting their livelihood by dressing up as a character from Avatar
Mm-hmm.
and relying on people's excitement and desire to be photographed with it.
It's true.
Just saying, that is the single way, the single method that person was making money that day.
Yeah. How's
In-
business doing, Dave?
So Peter saw this Navi character, and he's like, "Well, we have to
Knew
get
exactly what it was right away.
We have
Sorry,
to
go ahead.
call Jeff. We have to call Jeff. Get him over here.
He's like, we have to take a photo of this because he's
You
aware.
saw the giant line of people waiting to get their picture taken with the Navi.
Yeah. And Peter's like, we have to take a photo because he knows of the ongoing dispute on the Slice Filmcast about how culturally relevant Avatar is, and so he's like, we got to take a photo with this person. So we go up to this Navi character, and Peter's like, don't worry, David, I'll pay for it. So let me ask you, Devindra, how much money do you think one should pay to take a photo with a Navi on Hollywood Boulevard?
I almost feel like they should be paying you, but 10, 20 bucks? Sure.
Oh wow, I get things are way more expensive in New York, I guess. But
Yeah.
Peter was handed this person $1, right? And because that's honestly, I thought it was $1. Like I thought it was like $1 or $3 because the person is not doing anything other than walking around in
Right,
the costume, and you're just you're getting a photo taken with them. So Peter hands them $1, and the person takes $1 and says, "I'd really prefer $5." And Peter's like, "Well, I don't
That's
have
it,
$5."
fair.
Peter's like,
Yeah.
"I don't have $5." And she's like, "I can make change." So then Peter's like, "Okay." So he gets out his wallet and he's like, "Oh, actually I do have $5." So he hands over $5. And then, I'm like, her friend is with her, right? This Navi person has a friend with them dressed in a pirate outfit. And she's like, "Oh, I can take the photo for you," right? And
That'll be $5.
yeah, well, I'm like, so she didn't. No, I'm getting to that. So I'm like, no, I'll just take a selfie. So I'll take a selfie, and then I'm like, you know what? It would be nice to have a little photo that's farther away. So I hand my phone to the pirate person, and
Never hand your phone to a pirate.
yeah,
Yeah.
trust me, I'm learning that. And so then she takes the photo, and then we're like getting ready to leave, and then she's like, "What? No tip for the photographer?" And so then Peter tips her, but she also wanted $5. And I'll just say this, that I now have, in a way, more and less respect for these people. I have more
Listen,
respect in that.
at least $5. I will say $5 seems fair for the it just sucks what they're doing. So yeah, and that's fair compensation for standing out there and probably being ignored for hours on end. $5 seems fine.
I mean, I think, yeah, you wouldn't tip a valet $1, would you?
I would not tip a valet $1. I would do a few dollars, but I think a valet is performing a more valuable service than someone standing out there in a copyrighted outfit, taking photos of strangers. That's me. I don't know. I don't want to be like elitist about valets, but I guess I just feel I don't. The point I was making
You're
is
saying
that
if there was a Navi parking your car, you'd
That's-
pony up some dollars.
it'd be like
Parking
$10.
your Avatar.
$10.
Have a
for that.
car. There you go.
Yeah. I guess I have more and less respect because on the one hand, these people have this thing down to a science, right? Where they know how to extract the maximum amount of money possible
Oh yeah.
from individuals. And it's like, hey, game recognized game, and if that's what you're going to do, you might as well make as much money as possible. And they know exactly what to say to get that amount of money. But the reason I have less respect is I'm never doing that again. I think that was a little bit more
The
than
safest thing is never engage. Never engage.
yes. Just don't. Yeah, don't. If the opportunity comes up to talk to them,
Stay away
don't-
from that Elmo. Stay away from that Minnie Mouse. Just don't engage.
Indeed. Good.
Well, I,
They're
for one,
dangerous. They're
I'm very
dangerous.
proud of you, Dave, for taking a picture with a Navi. It's something that you can pass down to your grandchildren, and
Yeah.
when they're enjoying Avatar 5 and 6,
in
Sure.
100 years. Yeah.
I just want to say one last thing about this before we move on, which is that there's a photo of me and the Navi, and I'm holding her tail, like I'm picking it up and holding it, and a lot of people said, "Hey, like you shouldn't have done that without permission," because as we all know, the tail is the organ that Navi use both to control dragons and to mate with other Navi.
Yeah.
And they're like, you really have to have consent for that. And I just want to clarify that she asked me to pick it up for the photo. She's like, "Hey, pick up the tail. It's gonna look cool." So
Hashtag Navi too.
I just need to make clear that was how that went down. So, okay,
A lot of work probably went into that tail. The tail's the hardest part.
yes. All right, let's move on to what we've been watching. I'll say one quick thing that I've been watching, which is I had a chance to watch this movie called Medical Police. Have you guys heard of this? It's not a movie. It's a series.
It's a series. Yeah.
It's a
yeah.
series
That's great.
on Netflix. It's basically a continuation of Children's Hospital, which was an Adult Swim series, like starring Rob Corddry and David Wayne directed many of the episodes. And this is it's just like a straight continuation of that, but it's on Netflix. The episodes are a little longer; they're closer to like 20-25 minutes, and it's hard to describe what the show is. It's
The
extremely
pitch. I
goofy.
mean, the pitch is like it is sort of like almost like 24, but with medicine.
I think it's it's like
yeah?
a parody. It's like a parody of medical dramas, like
Yeah.
ER, Grey's Anatomy, Scrubs.
But they're out in the field fighting terrorists.
Yeah. But here's the thing. It's like, so if you think like postmodernism is like, there's no reliable reality and we can comment on it and such like, like Airplane is like, hey, we're
Sure.
kind of commenting and parodying these movies, right?
Sure.
These kind of dramas. This is like postmodern. It's like it's commenting on things that comment on hospital dramas. You know what I mean? Like it's like, hey, we know what it's like to satirize like this genre, and we're gonna like satirize the people that like satirize the genres.
It's like Comedy Bang Bang.
Yeah,
Comedy
exactly.
Bang Bang is that. It's like it's jokes for people that make jokes.
Exactly. It's ultra meta, and I don't think it's for everyone, but I had a great time watching it. So I would recommend it to you if that sounds interesting. If that sounds interesting. Weirdly, I think you actually have to have watched a significant portion of Children's Hospital to really get the most enjoyment out of this.
Is it in the same universe?
It's in the same. Not only is it in the same universe, it's the same characters. It takes place in the same location, and it references events that occurred in Children's Hospital. So it's like, you really need to have watched a lot of Children's Hospital to get
Great
the most
TV
out of this.
universe here.
Yeah, but they kind of do as much as they can to like set it up in the opening episode. So
Children's
any
Hospital expanded universe, man.
exactly,
Gotta get in there.
exactly. All right. Well, before we move on to what else I've been watching, we got to thank our first sponsor, Pretty Litter. Devindra, tell us about Pretty Litter.
Sure. So I have two cats. It is now winter and very cold in New York. And the problem with having two cats is that, yeah, they really stink up their litter boxes. So rather than go out to the store, lug a huge 20 or 40 pound bag of litter home, I've been using Pretty Litter to get kitty litter delivered directly to my door. And that is just a huge lifesaver in these very cold months. It's basically litter reinvented. They have super light crystals that trap odor and release moisture. So what you get is a very dry litter that doesn't actually smell very much. And it's pretty dust free too, which is a problem I've had with a lot of like corn based and other litters out there. I really love that it is delivered to me and it comes in a pretty small bag that I can store easily. It lasts an entire month. So before I used to juggle really heavy bags and boxes of litter. No more of that. And I think what's really cool about Pretty Litter is that it's sort of a health. Let me say that again. What I really love about Pretty Litter is that it's sort of a health detector too. It can change color depending on what's going on with your cat. So maybe a kidney issue, maybe one color. For my cats, like there have been urinary tract infections and things you have to track that are hard to really notice in normal litters. So I appreciate that Pretty Litter kind of helps me get through all that. So you can't change the weather, but you can change your kitty litter. Make the switch like I did today. Go to prettylitter.com and use promo code FILMCAST for 20% off your first order. That's prettylitter.com, promo code FILMCAST.
Thanks to Pretty Litter for sponsoring us today. I also had a chance to watch Bad Boys for Life.
Of course.
This is a massive hit.
Keeping
which
your
is not
brand
some-
strong, Dave.
Which is
Yeah.
not something I would have predicted. But yeah, it follows Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett, played by Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, teaming up again 17 years after the events of Bad Boys 2 to ride or die
They're still alive somehow
last for
after
one
Bad Boys
last
2.
job. I mean, it is a little bit silly because the dynamic is exactly the same. Where Marcus Burnett is a family man. He's married and has kids,
Mhm.
and his kids are getting married. And Will Smith is like a bachelor who's like sleeping
Hot shot
around.
playboy.
He's
Yeah.
such a playboy, and Will Smith is like 51 years old. So it's like you really got to settle down, man. It's like it felt to me like really shouldn't you have been having this conversation like 8 years ago? Anyway, suffice to say, I thought Bad Boys for Life was completely fine. It didn't offend me at all. It is kind of there's some like decent action scenes there, but the thing is, it's not directed by Michael Bay, and it's directed by Bilal Fallah and Adil El Arbi, and the what you get with Michael Bay, and I covered this in a video review I did at my YouTube channel, is Michael Bay is such a singular filmmaker. He'll put stuff in movies that no one else would put in. If you think of Bad Boys 2, the reason that movie is still beloved, despite the film being morally reprehensible, in my opinion, is that it has things like cadavers coming out of a truck and their heads popping off, and like the scene where they're like throwing cars down the freeway and they're bouncing around. It looks amazing. And the scene where they're taking out those guys in the bathroom and the camera like goes into a bullet hole and like does a 360-degree turn and goes back
Don't
through
they
a bullet hole.
just destroy a whole shantytown?
Yeah,
in
they
Haiti
destroy a whole
or something?
shantytown
Yeah.
like Police Story style, and it's just like
It's great.
it's only a singular mind like Michael Bay could have thought of those things, thought they were good, executed those things. And Bad Boys for Life has none of that. Like, I'm not going to remember any of the scenes from Bad Boys for Life.
I do hear, Dave. I'm actually going to check this out in the matinee at some point. But here it sort of reckons with their sort of like recklessness, which seems wild to me.
I wouldn't say that it seriously reckons with anything, in my opinion. Like it has the patina of reckoning with things. The thing is, there's moments when they're like pondering their life decisions and all the things. But like
Am I a
ultimately,
bad person?
at the end of the day, though, it's still gonna be like a movie that heads towards like a big action-packed confrontation at the end, right? And that's just fundamentally at odds. This is a thing we're going to talk about later in the show with our Little Women review. This is like I'm saying, Bad Boys and Little Women have a ton in common, right? Which is that they're both movies that want to kind of grapple with the bigger themes that they introduce. In the case of Bad Boys, hey, we've lived these long lives where we've inflicted countless acts of violence upon many people, some innocent, and also wanting to deliver an action-packed thrill ride in the movie. And that just makes her a very awkward juxtaposition. Also, like, in the time since Bad Boys 2, which again, I must point out, was released 17 years ago, that many franchises have kind of stepped up and taken the mantle of over-the-top action with hints of like family drama thrown in for a good
When
measure.
Fast and Furious
Fast and
exists,
Furious
how can
being-
Bad Boys exist?
Yeah, exactly. It is Fast and Furious is really the modern Bad Boys, right? Even Mission Impossible, I'd argue, kind of takes on that mantle. So
There were rumors of like a Fast and Furious like crossover at one point, which would be too expensive with Will Smith. But imagine that movie. That movie would rule.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think Bad Boys is just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
not really a movie that has much of a place in modern society, but at the same time, completely innocuous. Like there's many remakes like Men in Black International, for instance, that I found like to be almost outright offensive in terms of how bland they were. And this movie is not a great movie. Bad Boys for Life is not a great movie, but I did not find it offensively bad, and it made a lot of money. And there's probably going to be another Bad Boys. And
didn't they greenlit 4 already?
yeah,
like,
and
it's
you
happening.
know what? I would
You're
I would
over
go see
here
that, but
there. Day
I'm
one.
not excited to see it, but I would go see it and not feel terrible about it. So
Uh-huh.
that's the best thing I can say about Bad Boys.
It's
for
a
Life.
shame they used the Bad Boys for Life title on this one. That's all I'm saying. Like, come on, guys.
I agree.
Save it for number 4.
Save it for number 4. Save it for number 4. Devindra Hardawar, what have you been watching?
To stay sane during CES, I watched all of Mrs. Fletcher on HBO, and this is the new Tom Perrotta show starring Catherine Hahn. It's about a mother a single mother, her son goes off to college in the first episode, and she's an empty nester trying to discover herself and just see what she wants out of life. And there's a lot of like sexual discovery going on in the show. Like, she discovers porn, I think, for the very first time, and things get a little wild. I really enjoy the show. I like Catherine Hahn quite a bit, and I like Tom Perrotta. I like Tom Perrotta specifically because of The Leftovers and, just how great of a series that was. And he wrote the original book for that. So I found the series to be really funny and entertaining. Like, it's a human look at people going through some serious issues. Like, Catherine Hahn's character just has no sense of who she is. And her son, meanwhile, is like a straight up douchebag misogynist. And it's kind of his story in college is sort of him being in a place where he is not just the top jock. He's not just like the guy who everybody loves. Like, he is forced to confront the fact that he's kind of an empty vessel of a person. And the show is entirely about like these two characters trying to find themselves. And I think it's really entertaining. So if you liked the last Catherine Hahn show, which was I Love Dick, another show about sexual awakening in a way, I think you'd really enjoy this one. I think it's definitely worth a watch.
All right, that is Mrs. Fletcher. It's streaming right now on HBO. What else have you been watching, Devindra?
I did finally see Weathering with You, which is the new Makoto Shinkai movie, his follow-up to Your Name. This movie,
Wait, let's just pause for a moment. Jeff, did you ever have a chance to watch Your Name, the anime
Yeah,
movie?
we reviewed it, didn't we?
Yeah, we
okay,
reviewed
yeah, okay. Just I just remembering, and I think we all loved it. Am I right?
We
about
loved
that?
it.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I loved Your Name. I've loved a lot of his other films too. This one I don't think is up to the like epic heights of Your Name, but it's a really interesting film. It's about a high school runaway who escapes to Tokyo, kind of just like is a drifter, and finds this interesting family. He falls in love with a girl who has the power to stop the world from raining. Apparently, in this movie, like Tokyo is facing just crazy weather, and it is raining forever and ever, and she has the power to stop that. And it's about their relationship. This is a climate change movie, and it's kind of fascinating to see. This is a teenage romance set amidst climate change and dealing with the outcomes of it and the consequences of it. And I find that part of it really fascinating. The actual romance is just fine. It feels like very typical anime movie. Like there's a lot of J-pop. There's a lot of people running to each other, shouting their names. Like it's not as inventive as Your Name was, but I think it is a really beautiful movie to see on a big screen. And I think it goes places where people don't quite expect. And it kind of, it at least has like a very clear sense about the consequences of climate change that I didn't expect to see in a movie like this. So yeah, definitely interesting. It is in a lot of theaters, I think for this week, in the next couple of weeks. So check it out if you can. It's worth seeing on a big screen.
All right.
The good news is that in a few years, every movie will be a climate change movie.
Oh yeah. That's just all they'll make
That's
for
great.
some reason.
That's great. That's great news.
It'll be that
Jeff.
climate change romantic comedy, climate change heist movie, climate change action, climate change Marvel film.
It's just
It's
a
gonna all
lot
be
of
great.
water. It just all
It's
involves
just
a lot of water.
it's
Yeah.
all going to be the subtext. Really, will be climate change.
It's all gonna be Waterworld. The future is just Waterworld sequels. It's the Waterworld cinematic universe.
I think it's going
That's
to be
all
more
of
of
cinema.
the dry world around here.
Devindra, anything else?
One
you've
more
been watching?
thing. One more thing. I want to bring up Little America, which is the new show by Kumail Nanjiani. And what is his wife's name? I always forget.
Emily.
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 Gordon.
Emily Gordon.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. New show by Kumail and Emily Gordon, and it is it's a beautiful show, I think, about like the immigrant experience of America. And I've only seen the first episode, so I only have like the trailer also to base it off of. But the first episode is just a really beautiful thing of like I believe like a young Indian immigrant child who is basically left to fend for himself after his parents get deported back to India, and he has to manage their hotel. Like it is a story of like very specific immigrant experiences, but I think shows how why people would kind of come from other countries and try to suffer through all the difficulties to try to make it in America and make a life here. I found it really moving. It is kind of funny, but it's one of those. It's a bit of like This American Life. Like they're funny, moving, realistic stories. I think it's a lot of fun at this point. So I'm really digging it. I'm hopefully gonna finish it all up very soon. These are short episodes. They're only like 30 minutes. I do feel like the subject matter here probably could benefit from something longer. That's the only thing I'd say. Like these are big stories they're telling, and it seems like there's not enough time, but I'm enjoying it so far.
Awesome. Yeah. If everything goes right, I will hopefully be interviewing one of the writer directors of that show for Culturally Relevant. I'm
Nice.
very much looking forward to checking out the show. I've heard great things. So the show's Little America on
Yeah.
Apple.
It's
TV.
on Apple TV.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Apple TV Plus. All right, Jeff Canada. What
I
do you
understand that's a prequel to Little Women. No? Okay.
pretty rough. Pretty
What
rough.
I've been watching is so the other night sat down and said, you know what, honey, let's watch something to talk about on the Slash Filmcast. I want to have something.
I love it when you blindly bring your wife into something, Jeff, because I also know you will have very little idea of what's about to happen. But please go on.
Well, we'll see if the story lines up to your expectations. But we sat down and we are like, yeah, I want to watch something new, something we can talk about for what you've been watching on the show. And so she's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? We popped around a few different things. Basically, it's us biding our time for a few days when Picard debuts, because that's the next big show we want to start watching. But I had all these things that I wanted to watch, but I don't know. Like, what? Let's try something new. We can have an opinion on. We can get a few episodes in, perhaps. So we loaded up.
So the world is your oyster, right? You got
Yeah.
like the best dramas ever made. You could just at your fingertips, right? Like
Yeah.
some of the best shows ever made. The great works of art, monuments
stuff
to
like
create, monuments to
You guys
human
have-
creativity could be at your
Stuff
fingertips.
you guys have recommended.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So I booted up the old Apple TV Plus,
Yeah.
and we scrolled over to For All Mankind, which is a show that I've been really anticipating. I love the Ronald D. Moore. One of my good friends from college is in the show, regular cast member of For All Mankind. Very excited. The premise has me very excited. What if Russia won the space race, and what ramifications would that have? What would that mean? It's into it. Love it. And about 40 minutes into the first episode, which was well over an hour long, I think we had like 25, 30 minutes more to go. Looked over, wife was sound asleep. And I went, I am not going to watch any more of this. I will never know if this show gets awesome. I hope it does.
I hear it does, yeah.
I wanted to, boy, the first episode is real slow. I mean, honestly, listeners, if you stuck with For All Mankind, I hear the second season is already happening. They're already filming it. If you stuck with it and you say it gets awesome, please let me know so I can maybe try again. But anyway, so what happened was, the reason I told you that preamble is because my wife was sound asleep on me and on the couch. And so what I did was, as I often do, I pushed pause on the show and I loaded up the old Twitter and was just kind of browsing around. And I saw somebody tweet out, "Hey, this is amazing." Actually, it was ItMeJP, friend who's been on my video game show. He's like, "I'm only 20 minutes into this and it's amazing." So I click on it, and it was the Hollywood Reporter Actor Roundtable that they do every year around the Academy Awards.
Those are great. Yeah.
Over an hour. I loved it. It was incredible. What a weird grouping of individuals. You have Jamie Foxx, Tom Hanks, Robert De Niro, Adam Driver, and why is my brain not working? Oh my God. It begins with an S.
Shia LaBeouf.
Shia LaBeouf. And Shia LaBeouf.
And Shia's
I
like, I'm
think
here,
that's all of
guys. I'm here.
I think
Yes.
I think I got all of them. What a weird eclectic group of actors talking, and it's such an interesting thing because you see lots of interviews with actors, and oftentimes those interviews are quite good, revealing, interesting. They tell you insightful tidbits, but when you see a group of very, very high caliber, very successful, sort of top tier actors among their peers, the caliber of the discussion changes. The tenor of this discussion changes. I did not think the host, the Hollywood Reporter fella, gave particularly great questions, but it didn't really matter because they started riffing off of each other, and it was really about them sharing things between each other, and clearly the respect level among all of them was very high, and all of them are sort of basking in the glow of De Niro. It was pretty interesting, and it got into some interesting places, and they talk about the craft. I came away from that. I mean, I was already a big fan, but I came away from that with such a huge admiration for Adam Driver. That dude is whip smart, insightful, measured. His approach to the craft is so interesting. I mean, he goes on this interesting riff about how it doesn't matter what I'm feeling. Nobody paid their money to watch me feel something. They paid their money to feel something themselves. I am a vessel for them to feel. It doesn't matter if I'm feeling or not. And that's what I've always believed about the craft of acting. It was great. So I highly recommend.
Yeah.
If you're curious about any of these people, find any of those people interesting. I thought Shia LaBeouf, even though I couldn't remember his name, I thought Shia LaBeouf was quite interesting to hear from as well. It was such an interesting grouping. One you would not, I don't think you'd pick those people out and pluck them into a place, but it worked. It worked, and I found it fascinating.
Those things make great like podcast like experiences. Basically, you just put on and listen to those conversations. But if you like that, Jeff, I'd also recommend the Variety Actors on Actors thing.
Yes, I have watched that many times.
They have an Adam Driver and Charlize Theron one that looks really good too.
Not seen that one, but I have watched many of those. This I think would work as a podcast. I watched the video version and I found it interesting just because it's interestingly shot. They have a lot of cameras in that room, and you're often getting reactions, interesting reactions from people not talking, which I found like there are a few moments where Tom Hanks is agreeing or disagreeing with things non-verbally that I found pretty interesting. It's really cool. So salvaged my evening of viewing by watching this on my phone as my wife dozed on my shoulder.
That is the Actors Roundtable with the Hollywood Reporter. And it's available on YouTube, I believe. So you can just check that out right now.
I'm sure there's a
fine
one point
Jeff
for
and
women.
wife movie choice, by the way. Like it really works out too well.
Let's thank our next sponsor, Lightstream. Jeff, you want to tell us about Lightstream?
Yeah, it's a new year and the holidays just happened. You may have got a balance on your credit card. I don't like carrying any balance on my credit cards because they almost always have really terrible interest rates. You're talking like over 20% APR on credit cards. You can't live like that. You can't. You got to get out from under that kind of debt, carrying that kind of debt, credit card balance. You got to get out from under it. Lightstream is one way to do that. You can pay off your credit card balances with a credit card consolidation loan from Lightstream that could save you thousands in interest. They're much lower APRs than some of these average credit card carry with them. You can get a fixed rate from as low as 5.95% APR with auto pay. And Lightstream loans have no fees. There's no application fees, no origination fees, no transaction fees, no prepayment penalties. And the online application is quick and easy. You can apply right from your phone. Plus, you can get your money as soon as the day you apply. Lightstream believes that when you have good credit, you deserve a low rate and great service, and that's exactly what they deliver. So just for Slash Filmcast listeners, if you apply now, you can get an additional interest rate discount. And the only way to get that discount is to go to lightstream.com/filmcast. That's lightstream.com/filmcast for an additional discount. lightstream.com/filmcast. FILMCAST, all one word. Subject to credit approval, rate includes a 0.50% auto pay discount. Terms and conditions apply, and offers are subject to change without notice. Visit lightstream.com/filmcast for more information.
Let's move on. I want to thank the people who donated to the podcast this week. Thanks to new subscriber at the rate of $2 per month, Sam Veltri, and also to donors Rafa Solano, host of the Facile de Complacer podcast from Costa Rica, Nico from Vienna, Australia, Robert Schlemmer, and Richard Trier from Derby, United Kingdom, who writes in, quote, "First, thanks for all the great episodes down the years. Thought it was high time I gave a bit back and donated for the first time. If you can find time in a future episode, I'd love to hear you guys play a few quick rounds of a movie parlor game I was introduced to over Christmas. To play, all you need is access to Rotten Tomatoes. The rules are as follows. Pick a movie category. Then each player has to name a movie in that category. And once all players have picked, you check the Rotten Tomatoes scores to see which one has the lowest one. Whoever gets the lowest score wins a point. Here are 3 categories for you to have a go at. So, gentlemen, let's give this a quick shot, shall we? Let's just
So we're trying to find the worst rated movie in these categories.
Correct.
Okay.
The
Correct.
worst rated.
Worst rated. Let's just do like 1 or 2 of these, okay?
Yeah, okay.
Film titles with a color in the title. Film colors with a color in the title.
The worst movie that has a color in the title.
All right. Jeff, whichever one of you can come up with it, feel free to just shout it
man.
out. Just name anything that you can.
Red Dawn?
Red Dawn. Okay, which
Yeah, that's
one?
a good one. That's a
Which
good
one,
one,
though?
yeah.
Which one though?
So the latest one, the
The most recent
There's
one.
the deepest into the series that they get. So I don't know how many they made.
Devendra, how about you?
Yeah, I don't have anything that could be. Yeah, I would go with Red Dawn too. I can't think of anything.
I mean, okay, here are movies that come to mind. Okay, but they're all like good ones, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Color
that's the thing.
Purple.
Yeah.
Like, I can't remember
you
the
got
good
bad
movies.
movies.
Color Purple. There's like, I mean, at some point you just have to name a movie, right? So like,
Yeah.
there's like
Blue
Color Purple.
Velvet's gonna be high. It's I
was thinking
what
like
about
Blue Valentine, but I really love that movie as well. Right?
Yeah, everyone loved it.
The Three
what about
Colors
the Blue
trilogy.
Room? What
What'd
about
you say?
Blue Room?
Blue Room? I don't even know.
That
Okay,
was
so
pretty
anyway, look, my movie is Blue Valentine. Okay, even though I love that
Sure,
movie,
sure.
but it's the only one I can think of. So,
So I have Red Dawn. I have Red Dawn 2. Devendra, you have Red Dawn. Is that the
you
idea?
can't choose the same movie, but Devendra, just throw out a movie out there. Throw a movie out there that has a color, even if it's a good one.
Sure. Blue's the warmest color. 'Cause we're
Blue
on
is the warmest color. Okay, blue is the warmest color. Currently has a 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, doing pretty badly so far.
I win.
Blue Valentine, 87% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh,
Okay.
getting a little better.
Red Dawn, the 2012 movie, 14% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Jeff will win.
Jeff
with Red Dawn.
completely annihilated us at the game. At the game. That is a fun game. That is a fun. It's hard. It's hard to think of some of these movies.
Yeah, because you immediately think of good movies.
Okay. Let's just do one more. Movie starring Tom Hanks. Okay, this will be an easy one.
Oh yeah, this will be good.
Okay. So go and
What's
you know.
the worst movie starring Tom
Polar
Hanks?
Express. Polar Express.
Okay. Devendra's going with Polar Express. I'm gonna go with The Terminal.
I'm
Ooh.
gonna go with Angels and Demons.
Ooh.
Oh, dang, Jeff, man. Okay, Angels and Demons, starring Tom Hanks. That's a 2009 movie. That movie currently has a 36% on
Ooh,
Rotten
pretty
Tomatoes.
solid.
Man, you're
That's
you're
pretty
so
solid.
good
The
at this stuff.
Terminal has a 61%.
Yeah, it was well liked.
And then what was the one you chose?
I chose Polar Express. It's
Polar-
56 right now.
56%. Okay, so that was a lot closer. That was a lot
Yeah.
closer.
Polar Express is a pretty good pull, I think.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
pretty good pull.
Yeah. Well, fun game. Thank you for that suggestion, Richard. We will have to try it again at some point.
Yeah,
But,
you got to do that periodically. That's fun,
Yeah,
especially because I win.
Jeff, your knowledge of terrible films is unrivaled on the subject.
Honestly, I'm surprising even myself because I
It's like
figured
real.
I thought you guys would trounce me.
Indeed. Me too, Jeff. Me too. All right. So if you want to donate to the podcast, you can always go to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/filmcast. And if you don't want to donate, you don't have the cash or it's a hardship for you, just go to the Apple Podcast listing, leave a review for us. That's free, and it does help us quite a lot. Thanks to everyone who donated, and thanks to all who are leaving reviews for us. We really appreciate you. Let's get to our review of Little Women.